So you're thinking about moving to Jacksonville, Florida, but you're wondering, is it still affordable in 2025? Well, in this video, I'm gonna give you all the real numbers holding nothing back. We're gonna go over the housing costs and insurance and even dive into just what the cost is for groceries right now. So in this video, let's not waste any time and get right on to it. So as mentioned, we have a lot to cover here. I have notes to go over it all. If you wanna have a copy of these notes, just reach out to me. You can call me, text me, email me. My phone number, email will be on the video, or there's a link to my calendar in the description of this video. I'm always happy to help answer any questions when it comes to moving to and living in Jacksonville. But starting off, when it comes to the cost of living in Jacksonville, the important thing to take into account is how do we compare to the state and to the US from an average standpoint across the board. And what I can tell you is right away, we are actually 8% lower than the state average from a cost of living standpoint, and 7% lower than the country average when you factor everything in. Now, what is everything? Well, the first item we're going to go over is the utilities. Here in Jacksonville, depending on where you live and what county you live in, your utilities are going to be different across the board. Great example, if you choose to live in Duval County, which is the county that really makes up the majority of Jacksonville, Duval County tends to have its water, sewer, and electricity all covered by Jacksonville Electric Authority, or JEA for short. Now, if you start to go into other counties like Clay and Nassau and St. Johns County, you will start to kind of go away from JEA and you will start to get other utility companies, one of which is Florida Power and Light, which does handle a lot of electricity throughout the state, not just up here in Northeast Florida, which is mainly Jacksonville. But overall, when it comes to utilities, starting off, we're gonna have electricity. The electricity cost on average is gonna run you anywhere from $250 a month to $400 a month, depending on the size of your house, the age of the house, and how efficient it is. Now, there are gonna be times during the year, for instance, during the winter time, we start to see those costs go down tremendously. So even that $250 could be a little bit lower depending on, again, that time of the year. But on the flip side of that, on the other side of that coin, we have the summer times. Well, the summer times tend to bring a lot more heat, and so you will see that utility bill for your electricity go up quite a bit, as pretty much all the AC systems here in Jacksonville, Florida are going to be electrical, central heat, central air, with very few using gas. And there's gonna be reasons for that, as we'll go over later on this video, why there aren't as many that use gas, but typically here it's gonna be electric ACs, HVAC systems. The next thing is gonna be water. So water, and I'm gonna kind of clump water and sewer together, but we have a water cost for water that comes into the house, and we have a sewer cost for water that goes outside the house, back to the county or the city to manage. And they're both gonna be about the same. Water and sewer are gonna both run you about $40 to $75, per month, depending on the time of year and how much usage you have with it. For instance, part of where your water and sewer could increase is if you utilize a separate water meter for your irrigation, or if you don't use a separate water meter for your irrigation, then you will see those water and sewer numbers go quite a bit. So overall, for water, sewer, and electricity, which is gonna be your three main common ones here in Jacksonville, you're looking at about $250 to $400 for electricity, $40 to $75 for water, $40 to $75 for sewer per month. Then we have gas. Now, gas is something that's very unique here in Northeast Florida for Jacksonville, because depending on what county you live in and depending on what neighborhood you live in within that county, you may or may not have gas as an option for your home. So this will not apply for all homes across the board, whereas electricity tends to be across the board for all homes, that include the ones that don't have gas, but also the ones that do have gas, for some of those typical items that you would run gas with, such as a water heater or a gas stovetop, and so on. But overall, gas usage here, it's gonna again depend on how much you're gonna use it, but typical costs there on a monthly basis are gonna run you anywhere from $50 to $100, depending on how much gas you're using. And then we get to our internet. So internet, and I'm gonna use mainly internet as the example, because in today's world, most people here are utilizing streaming services. So the internet cost has gone up more than it used to be, because of the fact that, to stream what you want to stream, it is going to run you a little bit more money to be able to have those higher level bandwidths, higher level service. So right now, the internet cost here in Jacksonville is really running you anywhere from $80 to $90 a month for your standard servicing. But if you do need more speed, more upload, more download, you could see that that monthly amount go up tremendously depending on who you're with. And typically here for gas, I forgot to mention that, the typical servicer for gas for this area is going to be Tico. And then for your internet, it's going to typically be Xfinity, or it's going to be AT&T UVerse with fiber, if they have fiber as an option. Or there is another local company called IQ Fiber that is now starting to offer fiber as well in different zip codes, different counties within Jacksonville. So that's going to kind of wrap up the utilities. And to put in perspective, I like to always try to provide perspective on all these things. It's why when people I work with, have questions, I always tell them, either I'll know the answer, I'll know who to go to get you the answer, because for me, it's all about making sure that you have all the resources at your disposal to make the best choice for you and your family. But in this case, utilities tend to cost about 10% less compared to the US average, and it's actually about 8% less than the state average in general. So when you're living here in Jacksonville, Florida, you're normally going to be spending less on your utilities compared to other parts of the state and the country. So that's something that's very important to know, because that's less money going towards those items and more that can go towards maybe your monthly payment on a house, or maybe towards your savings for a rainy day or for future plans for you and your family. So all very important to know when deciding on, is Jacksonville where we want to end up in. Now let's go and get into the transportation cost here in Jacksonville. When it comes to transportation costs, what we're really going to gravitate towards on this topic is gas prices, as well as what it costs for your car registration to have a vehicle here, as well as what you're looking at typically for insurance here in Jacksonville. One thing I can tell you when it comes to Jacksonville, Florida, as someone who's been born and raised here, lived pretty much my whole life here, did spend a couple years over in Tallahassee, did graduate from Florida State University, go Noles. But what I can tell you as far as Jacksonville in a nutshell is, being the largest city land-wise in the continental United States, it means that there's gonna be a lot of driving here. We don't really have a very walkable city. There are some sections that are very walkable, so that's something that you're interested in as you're watching this video. You gotta reach out to me so we can go over those areas and figure out if that's really the pockets you wanna be in, or if you're more comfortable with driving and having multiple vehicles for your household to be able to get from place to place. But when it comes to transportation, let's start off with the average cost per gallon of gas. So the average cost per gallon of gas right this second, and again, these are always going to be changing. So that's the thing, is that this is something that gives you a good benchmark, a good barometer when it comes to determining what the costs are here in Jacksonville, Florida. But I can tell you, what the costs are today is going to be different than what they're going to be this time next year, or what they were this time last year. And to give some perspective, we're recording this July of 2025 to give you an idea of where we're at in 2025 here in Jacksonville, Florida. But the cost of a gallon of gas right now between the 4 main counties is coming in right around $3.05 a gallon. So that is a very good price for gas compared to some other states. And that is the lowest we've seen in quite a while here in Jacksonville, Florida. So whether if that's due to different different economic policies, or whatever the case may be, that has been a big benefit and boost for people living here because of the fact that you will be driving quite a bit here. Then let's get to car registration. So when it comes to registering your vehicle here, typically it's around $50 to $100 for your annual registration to keep it current. But when you're registering a new vehicle, here's the crazy part. The cost to register your vehicle here, $225. Whether it's new or used, out the door, that's it. It's a very good price across the board to get your car registered, to be able to start driving it here in the state of Florida. One thing to highlight with that, there will be some title costs separate from that when you do register your vehicle here. Those are going to be dependent on the age of the vehicle, what kind of vehicle it is, who's going to be driving the vehicle, so to speak. But in general, the registration cost, $225 out the door, you're good to drive here in Jacksonville, Florida as a resident. Then we get to car insurance. Now, gotta take a second here. Car insurance is really where we're gonna start to see some discrepancies there. I keep saying, hey, we're lower here, lower there. car insurance is not gonna be one of those things. Florida has one of the highest car insurance rates in the US, and realistically that is something that when I talk to people, when I work with people and they're moving here and they're going to buy their house, that's one thing I tell them is do keep in mind, you're going to see maybe better rates for other items, but when it comes to your car insurance, that's gonna be a pretty nice little price tag, even if you've been driving for years, have no accidents, have no tickets. Insurance here is a bit on the higher side. Like I said, one of the highest in the country. And for insurance here, depending on your age, your sex, if you have any accidents or if you've had any tickets, it can vary. But right now, you're looking anywhere from $217 a month all the way up to $322 a month. So that is something that you really want to pay attention to and really take into account, because there will be savings in other areas when you're living here in Jacksonville, Florida. But when it comes to car insurance, that is one thing to understand is you're not gonna have the savings there as much, unless you're coming from a state like California that I do believe is one of the few states that is higher than us here in Jacksonville when it comes to an average rate standpoint. But overall, even with that being taken into account, transportation costs here in Jacksonville, Florida is still 13% less compared to the US average and 9% less than the state average, because you are gonna have higher costs in cities like Tampa, Orlando, and even Miami, where there's a lot more people, a lot more driving, a lot more accidents across the board. So the next topic we wanna go over, or I will go over, is gonna be groceries. What we're gonna identify here is some of the three main commodities when it comes to different grocery items for when you're living here in Jacksonville. It's gonna be eggs, bread, and milk. Three of my favorite things. For people who know me, they know I love my carbs, I love my dairy. As I get older, I'm kind of having to dial those back some, but that isn't that I'm well known for here. But overall, the reason why we want to identify these three main things is because of the fact that of all the commodities we could go over for groceries, these are some of the most consistent to use as reference points. But again, if you want to know more about what different maybe meats or cheeses or other items are, just reach out to me and we'll go over all that in more detail. Because another thing that also factors into all this is also where you shop. Here in Jacksonville, we have a lot of different areas, a lot of different places you can go to shop for groceries, whether it's a mom and pop kind of grocery store, or if you're gonna go to say like a Walmart, if you're gonna go to a Target, or if you're gonna go to more the traditional grocery stores of Publix, Winn-Dixie, or if you're gonna go more on the high end, like a Whole Foods or maybe even Aldi to some degree, those are things that, or Sprouts, those are things that take into account because those will dictate a lot of your costs for these items. But for these items, currently we are seeing for about a dozen eggs, anywhere, plus or minus some, around $3.41 a dozen for eggs. So that's actually less than what we've seen previously, and it has gone down, and it's continuing to go down for the most part, but something to continue to monitor because if you're someone who does like to utilize a lot of eggs, that's something to take into account because there are parts of Jacksonville where you can live and actually have chickens yourself if you so choose. Now, not every neighborhood, not every area of Jacksonville is going to allow you to do that due to different city codes and different association requirements, but if that's something that interests you so you don't have to worry about paying for eggs yourself, something to take into account and something that can help navigate you on to figure out what those neighborhoods look like, where they're located, and if they're a good fit for you and your family. Then we get to milk. Like I said, I'm a big dairy person, but for a gallon of milk right now, you are looking at about $4.72 a gallon. Again, that does fluctuate up or down, and that's gonna increase or decrease depending on where you go for your milk. Because we also have places like Costco and BJ's and Sam's Club that sometimes do offer better pricing for that because of the fact that they're making their money off your membership and not so much what you're buying there. Something to take into account as well. Then we get to our bread. So bread, typically for a loaf of bread here, is gonna run you about $4.22. And that's again an average across the board. So depending on what kind of bread you get, like if you get white bread, you're probably gonna be looking at less, versus if you get more of a specialty bread, you are probably gonna be looking at $4.22 and maybe even more than that. So just something to take into account when you are grocery shopping is that the price is gonna be very dependent on where you shop and what you're shopping for as far as the quality or whatnot of these grocery items. And this is where this is the one category that we do see a bit of an increase on, but groceries here in Jacksonville do run about 4% higher. And this is not just Jacksonville, this is kind of the state of Florida in general, but they do run about 4% higher, on average price-wise compared to the US as a whole. So then take into account is you will see price savings in certain categories and certain items within those categories, but groceries is not going to be one of them. All right, next up is childcare, which is a very important one as Jacksonville is a very family-friendly city. Childcare is so important to me as someone who eventually plans on having a family and having kids grow up here in Jacksonville. I always like to kind of go over it because you have a lot of different options at your disposal here. Some you may know about, some you may not, but they also kind of come with different cost structures and different things to take into account when you're living here in Jacksonville. Because ultimately, like I mentioned, I love how Jacksonville is a very family-friendly city. There's always tons of events to go to. There's tons of sporting events. You have the most navigable water in the state here, as well as the most intricate public parks system in the state. So there's always things outdoors to do here. Obviously, we have our beaches as well. And ultimately, when people do move here, childcare is something that they do take into account when it comes to schooling. So with schooling, we're gonna start off with more that preschool, what's that typical cost look like? And right now, for most preschools here in Jacksonville, Florida, you are gonna be looking anywhere from $1,000 to $1,500 per month on average. Could be a little bit more or a little bit less depending on where you send your kids, if that's something that you're going to have done. But it gives you an idea of what that cost looks like prior to them getting to that K through 8, kindergarten through 8th grade kind of section of their, growing up life. The next thing though is gonna be, again, when they get to school, past pre-K, and when it comes to public schools versus private schools versus charter schools, it's important to know what you have at your disposal. And what I can tell you is when it comes to the schooling here, a lot of it is gonna be county dependent. So a lot of people who live in Nassau County, Clay County, St. Johns County, a lot of times you will see most kids in those counties will tend to go the public school route because those have some of the best schools in the whole state of Florida. Specifically, St. Johns County is very well known across the board throughout the state and honestly countrywide for just how good their public school system is here in Jacksonville. So for a lot of times, for those counties, you tend to see a lot more public school systems being utilized for all kids. And again, there will be some private school here and there, some charter school here and there, but you don't see the emphasis on that as much until you get to Duval County. Now the cost for public schools, not really any cost besides just materials, supplies, maybe some uniforms, but most public schools here don't require any sort of uniform for the kids to wear. So very minimal cost there for public schools. Then we did charter schools. So charter schools are utilized in all the counties, and you probably see it most in Duval County, but the charter schools, they are funded by the local government. So again, there's no cost if that's the route you want for your kids or they want for themselves, other than materials, uniforms, etc. Now let's get to the one that you probably really want to know more about, which is those private schools. Here in Duval County, here in Jacksonville, we have some really great private schools, but they do come with different price tags. So realistically, the four main ones we're going to identify when it comes to, or really five when it comes to Duval County, is we're going to identify University Christian High School, you have Trinity Christian, you have Providence, you have Episcopal, you have Bishop Kenny, and actually I'm going to throw in a six, you have Bowles High School or school system. So of those six, they do range anywhere from $12,000 a year all the way up to $33,000 a year. And what I can tell you is schools like Bowles are very well known because of the fact that there's a lot of emphasis on the athletics there as well as the schooling there. And the best way to put it is, there's been some very high level athletes come from Bowles over the years, especially when it comes to the Olympic side of things. But overall, the school that tends to have the most recognition right now as far as, I would say a good job of branding themselves and making an emphasis on bringing kids in is probably Providence High School or Providence Schools. with probably Bishop Kenny right behind that. But for those schools, like I said, the 12,000 is going to be closer to that University Christian, Trinity Christian, Providence, per year mark, and then your Episcopals and your Bowles High School or schools. I don't know why I keep saying high school. Sometimes I get a little tongue-tied there. Those are going to tend to run you closer to that $33,000 a year. And with Bowles, for instance, they do have a dorm set up too for someone who's not local. Probably wouldn't apply for you because you're probably going to be living here in Jacksonville if you're watching this video. But those actually run closer to $68,000 to have the dorms included. So something to definitely think about, because when it comes to the schooling system here, when it comes to childcare, it's important to know what you have at your disposal when making your decision on, are you going to move to Jacksonville? Do you want to live in Jacksonville? And another thing too is, when it comes to public schools, do keep in mind, at least in Duval County, you do have the ability to kind of pick your school for your kid, even if you don't live in that school district. But we always suggest, if there's a school district you want to be in, it never hurts to kind of keep the home search within that school district, if at all possible. So the next item we're going to now discuss is services. All right, when it comes to services, a couple items we're going to highlight here, just different services that you may need for yourself, for your house, for your vehicle, when you're living here in Jacksonville. Because again, that's my whole goal here, is just to give you a bit of a teaser, a bit of an idea of what to expect when living in Jacksonville, and really determine, is Jacksonville the choice for you? Because one other thing I can tell you is, here in Jacksonville, you do have, for a major city, probably the best prices in the state when you're comparing us to, say, a Tampa or Miami or an Orlando. But there are always some drawbacks too, where we may not have as much attraction as those cities, but we still have good attraction regardless. Anyways, as far as services, the first thing we're going to identify is, getting your hair cut, because for most people, they have hair, they need it cut. It's good to know what you're looking at cost-wise, right? I know I like to always kind of keep an eye on that myself. And one thing I can tell you is, right now for like a men's haircut, we're running probably $30 to $50 for a cut. There are going to be people who are going to charge more than that. There are going to be people who are going to charge less than that. But typically on average, you're looking at anywhere from $30 to $50 for a men's haircut. Then we get to the women's haircut, and those are going to be a little bit more pricey. And for them, those are going to be anywhere from $75 to $100, if not more. So something to take into account when living here is you are going to have to think about that as a cost when have to get your haircut. The next thing is going to be more for your health. So let's go over dentist and doctor. So for a typical dentist visit here, on average, you're going to run about $125 for typical dentist cleaning. Obviously, if you have health insurance, there's a good chance that might be covered with it. If not, a small deductible. I know for myself, I tend to utilize Humana. I pay about $33 a month, and it pretty much covers all my dental care. I do have a little bit of out-of-pocket here and there at times, but definitely well worth the cost to just ensure that I can have my teeth protected at all times and ensure that if anything happens, I have something to go to. And then as far as doctor's visits, again, just like dentists, if you have insurance in place, it typically will cover different items. But for your typical routine physical or just a primary care visit, that's going to run you anywhere from $150 to $250 depending on who you go to, and again, what they charge. But ultimately, it's always well worth it to make sure your health is taken care of. Then let's get to the car, because again, how are you going to the doctor if you don't have a car? As far as for like car service, such as oil change, tire rotation, typical diagnostic, we are seeing those run anywhere depending on the vehicle and the age of the vehicle and how often you've had it done, anywhere from $65 to maybe $135 for your typical car services to make sure your car is maintained properly while living here in Jacksonville. Because again, you're going to be driving quite a bit if you choose to live in and move to Jacksonville. And then let's get to the house, because we're starting to get now into just what it takes to live in Jacksonville from a house standpoint. And specifically, again, I'm shooting this in July. Well, we have a lot of heat in July. We tend to have a lot of rain in July. What do those things do? They make grass grow. I can tell you, I am out there myself, every so often having to cut my yard, and ultimately I have utilized services in the past, but I like the challenge sometimes of doing it myself. And right now what I can tell you is for typical lawn service here, for your standard cut, it's not going to really include much for landscaping, but your standard lawn cut's going to normally run you about $42.55 a cut. Could be a little bit more, could be a little bit less, depending on how frequent you have your yard cut. Typically, if you have a plan with a company, you're going to probably be less than that, but still within a very close ballpark range of that. Because again, you have to have it cut as the city does require it. Because if you don't let the yard go too long, then you can start to get violations and incur fees with the city or with your HOA, depending on what neighborhood you live in here in Jacksonville. And as we're talking about houses, let's go and discuss more about some other house or state related items right now. So before we get into the house and state related items, I do just want to say when it comes to the services, when it comes to healthcare specifically, such as doctor checkups, primary care visits, and dental, cleaning visits, that cost is typically 15% less here compared to the U.S. average, and 13% less than the state average. So just something to take into account. But getting back on topic, when it comes to house and state related items, these are going to be items like your taxes, your insurance, your insurance, your sales tax, as well as what is the cost for typical trash and recycle pickup for different counties here in Florida, here in Jacksonville. So starting off with property taxes, this is going to be utilizing a standard $350,000 house as an example, because again your tax is going to be fully dependent on what you pay for the house. So again, the higher price the house, the more you're paying taxes. Is what it is. If you don't like it, maybe Jacksonville's not for you, but that's how it is in most cities and states. So again, utilizing an example of a $350,000 house, we'll start with Duval County. Duval County has the highest millage rate of the 4 main counties that kind of make up Jacksonville at 17.865. And that's going to give us, that millage rate is going to give us roughly about $5,600, $5,627 to be exact, for our taxes for a house in Duval County at $350,000. Then in Nassau County, you're looking at a millage rate of 15.628. And that gives us a price or taxes of $4,922. Going to Clay County, that's the next lowest at 15.0173 millage rate, and that puts the taxes around $4,730 a year. Then you get to St. John's, and St. John's has the lowest millage rate with a caveat at 12.6031, which puts your taxes around $3,969 for that $350,000 house. Now the caveat with St. Johns County specifically, and you do see this in Nassau and Duval and Clay, just not to the degree you do in St. John's, is St. John's, a lot of their communities, especially their larger communities, utilize what's called a community development district fee. And this fee is going to be an additional tax. Part of it does act as your maintenance of the community. So typically these communities will have very minimal HOA fees, but that additional tax, when you add that into your typical property taxes, does put St. Johns County taxes roughly around the same range as a Duval County home. So again, if you can find a home in St. Johns County that doesn't have that CED fee, that's where you really start to see some wins, because of the fact that you utilize that lower millage rate without having to worry about the pesky CED fee if you don't desire those kinds of amenities. So something to take into account. And another thing too that does not get identified in this is, if you do live in Jacksonville and it's your primary residence, you have the ability to homestead your home. When you homestead it, it gives you multiple tax benefits, such as reducing the taxable value and also reducing how much they can increase your taxes year over year, them being the government, the city, the state. And so that's something that's very great to utilize, and we always suggest and walk through the process with all the buyers we work with to ensure they know how to file their homestead promptly so they don't lose it for a year or so. Now once you do it once, you don't have to do it again. So that's also a great benefit with it. So again, if homestead's filed, all these numbers I gave you for the different counties or taxes would actually be even less. Then when it comes to trash and recycle and waste pickup, yard waste specifically, the cool thing about it is paid for along with your taxes, so it's just once a year. And those tend to run across the 4 counties anywhere from $250 to $350, some counties a little bit higher, others less, per year. So really great costs to ensure that you have trash pickup every week and recycle pickup every other week and yard waste pickup typically every week. So great positives there. Now here's one item, state related, that people love about not just Jacksonville, but Florida as a whole. And that is that we do not have a state income tax. So the fact that we don't have a state income tax does give you more savings to be able to use in other places when you're living here in Jacksonville, Florida. You know, I have family in Georgia and they do love it up there. They're actually in more North Georgia, but they do, you have to pay that state income tax. And it's one of those things that, you know, depending on what day you ask them, they may not necessarily like that they're paying that state income tax. So the fact that Florida doesn't have that, that's a great benefit in my opinion for living here in Florida and in Jacksonville. And it's another reason why I choose to live here myself. And then sales tax. So sales tax, you're gonna have different sales tax in different states, but our sales tax here is gonna be 7.5% on most goods and services. That being said, you know, there are certain exclusions. For instance, groceries, you know, are not normally, you know, required to have sales tax added to them, and they're normally exempt. So that is a benefit you get there. And then lastly, before we finish this video, the most important thing I wanted to go over is really, you know, what are values like here for homes? You know, again, if you're gonna move here, you know, great, okay, I know what it costs to live here, but what does it really mean to be able to afford living here when it comes to buying a house? If you know me, you know I like to save the best for last. In this case, if you really know me, you know why I save this for last, which is, again, it's the values of homes currently here in Jacksonville, Florida. The reason I like this so much is because I always joke with people, numbers don't lie, you know, opinions can lie, but numbers don't lie. And really when it comes to living here in Jacksonville, you know, a big component of it is determining, you know, can you and do you want to afford what it's gonna take to live in the different areas of Jacksonville? You know, the point of this part of the video is gonna more dive into just what our average, or not average, but our median price points are for the 4 main counties, but do take into account that's going to be more of a broad overall look into the county. But within the county, you're going to have neighborhoods that are going to be below these prices. You're going to have neighborhoods that are going to be above these prices. In some cases, you're going to have neighborhoods that are going to be well above these prices with multi-million-dollar homes that do get included in the median that being determined, but doesn't always paint the full picture. So as we go through this, as we end this video, do keep in mind if you have any questions, if you want to know about any specific neighborhoods and what the values are in those neighborhoods, all you have to do, call me, text me, email me. It's going to be on the screen somewhere over here. So just, you know, make sure to reach out, because my goal is always to help provide as much knowledge and value as possible to you. So that way you have every detail possible in making your decision on where to live for you and your family. But getting back to it now, the median home prices, they're gonna kind of vary depending on the county. Some counties are gonna be higher than others. In this case, we're gonna start from the lowest and we're gonna work our way up. So Duval County, which is going to make up, again, more that centralized Jacksonville, is gonna be the lowest of the 4, with roughly median home prices running around $315,000. Now I can tell you, here, growing up here in Duval County, there is still a lot of value in the county depending on what neighborhood you want to live in and what area you want to live in, because of the fact that we are such a diverse community here. You know, I like to always joke with people, you know, I've sold multi-million-dollar homes here. I've also sold homes under $100,000 way back in the day. So values have appreciated quite a bit, but at the same time, there's still more room for appreciation to occur because of the fact that we are still much well positioned in price compared to some of the other major cities in Florida, and even more around the whole Southeast in general. You know, people still choose to live in Jacksonville because our prices are still better than Tampa or Orlando or Miami, and we do have other costs of living that are much well priced that make it even more attractive for people when they move here. But for Duval County, that median home sales price is currently sitting around $315,000. And it will be interesting to see if that increases or decreases throughout the rest of this year. What I will tell you is I wouldn't be surprised to see some decreases there due to the fact that we do have higher rates countrywide. And as rates will eventually start to come down, that will probably allow prices to appreciate back up. The next county we're going to highlight is Clay County. Now, Clay County is well known, like I said, for their schools. Clay County is also going to be to the southwest, southeast can put you in the ocean, southwest of Duval County. And Clay County is an area where if you're looking for land, if you're looking to kind of be out more, I wouldn't say the country, but just more rural you're okay with driving maybe 15, 20 minutes longer to get to everywhere that you may want to go, Clay County has some amazing value, some amazing potential out there, and it still has some amazing neighborhoods or communities like Fleming Island that are very popular for people local and from other parts of the country to move to. So it really gives you kind of best of both worlds and gives you a lot of options out there to choose from. I was talking to someone just the other day, and as she mentioned, she works here in Duval County, but she chooses to live in Clay County because she doesn't like the hustle and bustle of Duval County. She can work with that hustle and bustle, but on a day-to-day basis from a living standpoint, she likes to be out, have a little more land, and just have more privacy out there, which I completely understand. And then we get to Nassau County. Now, Nassau County is going to be to the north of Duval County, and Nassau County is going to be between Duval and the state line, so it's the last county before you get to Georgia. And Nassau County is going to see a much higher price. Actually, with Clay County, I think I forgot to mention, with Clay County, that price point, you're sitting around $351,000 for your house price. So obviously Duval was $315, Clay was $351. Nassau, which is to the north, is up to $470,000 for that median home price. Now you may ask me, or you may ask, Justin, why is the home price, why did it, jump $120,000? Well, what I can tell you is a big reason for that jump is going to be along the coastline, specifically Amelia Island. So Amelia Island is a very cute little city. Has a lot of historicness to it, historic feel to it. Really is kind of a destination for tourists where you're not having to deal with too much hustle and bustle, but you still get to experience some great coastline. And so Amelia Island kind of pumps those numbers up some. If you exclude Amelia Island, that medium home sale price in Nassau County would probably come down some. But another reason why Nassau County is higher is because they do also have some amazing schools, and they do still kind of give you, like Clay County, the ability to have some land as well. But the one thing to keep into account with Nassau County is you do also have neighborhoods such as Wildlight that are, that has been around now for a little while, that do also give you, just like with St. John's, which we'll get to in one moment, just bear with me, that do have those CUD fees for their amenities. That is that additional tax that, when you add that in, probably gives you the highest taxes between the 4 counties on a year-to-year basis. So something to take into account. Then we get to St. John's County. So St. John's County is very well known specifically for a couple different neighborhoods or communities, such as Ponte Vedra Beach and Nocatee. So Ponte Vedra Beach is very well known, especially if you are a golfer watching this, because that is where the Players Championship is. In addition to the Players Championship, there are also multiple other golf courses with Sawgrass Country Club, with Marsh Landing, and with the Plantations, a fully private community that is amazing, to say the least. But overall, those two communities, Ponte Vedra Beach and Nocatee, are going to be what's going to drive this price up for the median home sale price for St. Johns County, along with the fact that the schools and the infrastructure there is very popular with people who are moving there. St. Johns County, if I hadn't mentioned it yet, that median home sale price is $530,500, roughly. So we did see another bump up of almost $100,000, I guess, was that $60,000, $70,000 from Nassau County, but it's also $215,000 more than what we saw in Duval County. So when you are thinking about moving here, that's something to take into account is you do have maybe a lower tax rate in St. John's, but it's going to cost you a little more to be able to afford in St. John's versus, say, Duval. And again, every county has some amazing neighborhoods that are very popular with people. So it's one of those things that, in my opinion, Duval is a great county to live in, as I live in it myself, but they all have pros and cons, which if you ever want to know more about them, again, you just got to reach out to me. But overall, hopefully this exercise was very helpful for you if you're watching this. Jacksonville, Florida housing is still about 13% less than the US average, about 16% less than the state average. So in my opinion, if you are watching this and you have any further questions, I would highly suggest you call me, you text me, you email me, whatever is your preference to get a hold of me. Do it so we can further discuss Jacksonville and what all it has to offer. Because for me, I love when people reach out to me to figure out what neighborhood, what community, what part of Jacksonville, or even if it's not Jacksonville, what other areas interest them, so I can help provide as much value as I can for them, even if they're not the ones that I end up working with because they choose maybe another city or another state to move to. For me, it's all about providing value. So at the end of this video, there will also be some links to some of our model home tours, some of our other amazing videos that we've done on this channel. So again, feel free to check those out too, and I'll see you guys again on our next video.